This episode of Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Inside the Breakthrough, a new history of science podcast full of did you know stuff.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
Welcome to another classic episode of the show. As always, we're really glad to have you here. And these episodes give me a chance to take a look back at some of the real early interviews we did here on the podcast. You might have missed this one from December of 2015, all about going to Disney World. A Disney vacation is really like no other. And not only is it pretty expensive, but to get everything you want, you really need to have a plan. Seriously, have you been there? You need a plan. Now, I have to tell you, true confession, I am a bananas Disney planner. I absolutely love planning trips like this. This may not be your cup of tea. Maybe you're somebody who just goes with the flow. But I really think that if you have diabetes, if your kid or you as an adult are going on a vacation where you have to do this much walking, this much line waiting, although we don't wait in lines, and I'll share my secret in just a moment, this much weird food or strange food, the whole enormousness that can be a Disney World vacation. Once you add diabetes to the mix, there's a lot to think about. And that's why I was really excited to talk to Robyn Adams. She is a Disney planner. She's a travel agent. She also runs a really big group that goes to Disney World. They're on Facebook as well. She just knows her stuff. She also has a husband, a son, and a father-in-law who all live with type 1 diabetes. And as you're listening and planning vacations, after people have been vaccinated and things are starting to open up again, as you're planning vacations and trips and, going back to Disney parks or maybe the first time you're going, I really hope this episode will help. I have to tell you, though, a little bit about my planning and why I am the way I am. And I kid you not, we really do not wait in lines. My family has been very lucky. We've taken several big trips to Disney World. We haven't been to Disneyland, but we've been to Disney World several times, not including quick trips. My parents are 2 hours south of there, and we do go to the Friends for Life conference, which is in Orlando in July usually. So I'm not counting that because that's not a true, what I would say, Disney, couple of days or even a week in the park, that kind of thing, vacation. The very first time we went was when Leo was just 4 years old, and we just went for a day. We didn't even take Benny. He was 1. We left it with my parents. We drove up from their house, took that 2-hour drive. We ran all over the place. We had a great day. It was in January. It was cold. So, there really wasn't anybody there. But we met princesses. We had a princess dinner, and then we headed home. So that was the first time. The second time when I took both kids, I didn't plan well at all. We arrived at 1:00 in the afternoon during spring break. Those of you who have been there and done that are either laughing at me or horrified. I have never seen that many people in one place in my entire life. We got to the Magic Kingdom at 1:00 and it was so crowded. I didn't think we'd be able to move. And I was really concerned for my kids' safety. We stayed, I want to say, an hour. I think we did, I don't even know if we went on a ride or did anything or saw a parade. I think we saw one parade because we were just stuck there on Main Street. And then we left. And we spent the afternoon at our hotel with the pool, which the kids thought was the greatest thing ever. I mean, they had such a fun time in the hotel. And then the next morning, we woke up super early and got to the park. I have a picture of us on the first boat from the Wilderness Lodge, resort, and the moon is still out. I mean, we got to the park as it opened, and it was spring break, so it was probably open at 7:00 that morning, and had a great 3 hours. And it was amazing. And that was the beginning of my Disney planning. And I have never gone back without a better plan than that. I'm going to talk more about it after the interview, just some tips and tricks that I can share with you, diabetes aside, what I think you can do to make your vacation a lot more fun and make your money go further. But that is neither here nor there. We will get to Robyn Adams, the true Disney with diabetes expert, in just a moment. But first, this episode of Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Inside the Breakthrough. If you're intrigued by science, get excited about the process of discovery and want to have the best stories at your next dinner party, this is the show for you. In the current episode, they are asking and answering, does snake oil actually contain snakes? Host Dan Riskin is phenomenal. He is very entertaining, and he really digs deep into these stories. Search for Inside the Breakthrough anywhere you listen to podcasts. It'll be wherever you found this one. And this podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. My guest for this classic episode is a travel agent, a Disney planner, and the organizer of the Diabetic Mousketeers event. And that is happening this year, Memorial Day weekend. I will link up the information from her website, and you can learn more about how Robyn Adams wants you to meet families, share stories, and experience the magic. I was excited to talk to Robyn, not just for the Disney experience here, but also because, as I mentioned, she has 3 generations of type 1 in her family, so she really knows her stuff. Quick heads up, we spend the first few minutes of this interview talking about her family and those 3 generations. If you're just here for the Disney stuff, then you should fast forward about 7-8 minutes in. That's when we pick up the advice for going to the parks. Robyn Adams, thank you for joining me. Welcome to Diabetes Connections.
Thank you for having me.
Before we talk Disney, and we're going to talk a lot about Disney, let's talk about you. Tell me about your diabetes connection, because this isn't just your child. Your husband has type 1 as well.
Yes. My husband, who I've been married to for 19 years, was diagnosed when he was 12 years old. So it's been, part of my life I've known him for 21 years now. So it's been there for a very long time. And then our son was diagnosed at age 4 after we'd been married for 7 years.
What's that like from your perspective? And I'm sure your husband's is a bit different too, but when you have lived with type 1 with your spouse, but then your young child is diagnosed, how different was that?
It was very overwhelming because the way we handled it in our marriage is my husband already had a mother. So therefore, I did not mother him. I did not hound him. I did not say, did you check your blood sugar today? Are you supposed to be eating that? I had no involvement whatsoever. He handled everything. Then there's also the drawback to that in the essence of I didn't really have a fully understanding of the disease because I was always kind of at an arm's length distance, a little bit out of respect to him, because I didn't want to hound him. I didn't want to stand on top of him and, mother him basically. So we always kept it a little bit of distance. So when my son was diagnosed, Rob was still doing it the old method of 3 shots a day using 2 different types of, using the N and the R. He was doing the old-fashioned NPH method.
Wow.
And so he was not carb counting. He was not on a pump or anything. So when my son was diagnosed, I literally had this fear go through my head of, oh my gosh, we're going to get divorced. I'm going to kill my child. I don't know what I'm doing. No clue whatsoever. And since Rob was doing it the old method, it actually was a crash course for both of us, which was wonderful. And honestly, diabetes did nothing but bring our family closer together. It gave me much more insight as to how it affected him day to day. He helped me see what my son was going through. And he really helped to keep me grounded from not overreacting to certain things, to showing that, yes, he can survive. Yes, he can do this. It's okay. Not hovering and just helping him live a full and enriched life, because that's what Rob did for years and years. Through college, he was an avid rock climber, camper, hiker, everything. And he did all of that which kind of astounds me, doing it on the NPH method and not carb counting kind of overwhelms me with that thought.
Yeah, wow. So did he change his diabetes management at all, seeing what your son had access to?
Well, it was interesting. The day that Robert was diagnosed on a Tuesday. Rob was at his doctor on Monday, right before getting fitted for his pump.
Wow.
And he was supposed to be in his own carb counting education class Tuesday afternoon. Well, at that point, we were admitting Robert into the hospital for diabetes.
Wow. And
he had asked his doctor the day before. He had said, we're starting to see a few signs. And Robert, what do we need to do about this? And the doctor said, well, go ahead and take a fasting blood sugar the next morning. And so we did, and we had checked Robert's blood sugar ever since he was 6 months old. I checked it every 6 months pretty religiously, just keeping an eye on it. And But I tell you that one morning, that was the hardest blood sugar to check because we had actually started seeing signs at that time. And we knew for a fact that's what it was. And we checked his blood sugar. It was 158. And we called the pediatrician. We called my husband's endo and said his blood sugar is 158. And the guy said, well, that's not too bad. We said, this is his fasting blood sugar. They said, you call your pediatrician right away.
Yeah.
And by the time we got him to the pediatrician, his blood sugar was 425. And we were off to Scottish Rite. And that was it.
Now, from your son's point of view, though, you're 4 years old and your dad has type 1 and your dad is about to be doing the carb counting classes and the pump classes and a lot of things that you yourself as a 4-year-old are going to be going through. Was he do you think he thought at any point, well, everybody's dad, everybody goes through this?
Oh, he thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he can't wait for me to be diagnosed. So, Oh, yeah. Robert's now 12, but, for years it was the topic of conversation of, okay, Mom, when are you going to have diabetes?
When are you going to join our club?
Yeah, he doesn't he understands, but at the same time, it's like everybody else has it. Why don't you? And see, on top of that, too, my husband's father also has type 1 diabetes.
Wow.
So it's a family tradition for this whole family. And Robert's just waiting for that last shoe to drop for me. So
that's funny.
But we were very fortunate when he got diagnosed at 4 because he doesn't understand life without it. And he grew up watching his dad do shots and check his blood. So he became more like his father, and it just became even more of a way of life for all of us.
Wow. That's a remarkable story. Is your husband's father still alive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He is.
Wow. I always ask about things like that because I think for some of us who had no experience with type 1 before, my child was diagnosed 9 years ago, and I didn't know anything about type 1, really. So I'm always impressed. I don't even know if that's the right word, but I always like to hear about older people. How old is he?
He is 74, and he was diagnosed in his 40s.
Wow.
Which is, to me, just wonderful that they caught it at that time as type 1 and did not try to label him as type 2.
Right. We hear a lot about misdiagnoses like that.
Exactly. That's always my biggest concern when I do hear about adults going in and being diagnosed, and either they're, the parents of children that I know or spouses, and I'm always so quick to say, please make sure that they truly, truly know that it's type 1 and not type 2. Just because when it goes overlooked for so long, they get so sick. Mm-hmm.
So do the 3 of the boys talk about this? It just must be so funny to have, I don't know if that's the right word. Let me start again. Do the 3 of them kind of compare notes?
They do to a point. Wesley does still do the MPH method. He's 74 years old. He's been doing this for a long time. Mm-hmm. You're not going to change his method. That's just the way it is. So they do compare stories, and Rob will try to give him helpful tips or try to say, I really wish you would try to do it this way. And no, he's good. He's got his way down. But you also have to look at it from the perspective of the individual with the disease. They're the ones who juggle and manage and live with the disease. If they're set in their routine and their way of doing things, it's really hard to get somebody to change, because change could mean big things. Good or bad, it could mean big things. So we just try to step back and, respect and understand that that's his perspective. So, but they talk about it a lot, and it's nice to have, two boys in the kitchen treating loaves together, things like that. There's just kind of that understanding in the household that, okay, this is what it is. We've got to stop, take care of it, and then we'll move on from there.
Let's move on to talk about Disney. How did you get involved? You're a certified Disney planner. Is this something you always loved?
It is. We started taking Robert when he was 3. And it just kind of grew into a natural obsession to where we were going several times a year. And then a few years ago, we were in a position where the main business that I was a home appraiser, was starting to dwindle due to the economy.
What gave you the idea to take your Disney planning and diabetes and put the 2 together?
Seeing the need for it. seeing the questions on Facebook pop up over and over again, I'm going to Disney, what do I do? Seeing the overwhelming feeling and feeling the fear come through people's posts of how they just needed somebody to hold their hand for a few minutes to say, you can do this. A lot of people, once you've done Disney, you do understand, you know the loops, you know everything, but especially when you've been a first-timer and you've never been, first of all, Disney in itself is such an expedition, just dealing with all the ins and the outs, the resorts, the dining plan, the tickets, the 4 parks, the 2 water parks, then you've got Disneyland with the 2 parks over there, the rides, the attractions, the characters, taking all of that in because you're investing a lot of money into this trip, so you want it to be just perfect. Then when you throw diabetes into the mix, knowing that that could make your magical trip that you want to be so perfect quite imperfect, it's a very daunting task for individuals.
Yeah.
So I started to hear that in the post and started to see it and just realized that there was a need for it. So I just decided that, well, this is what I do. I'll just start kind of tailoring all of my planning towards focusing towards families with diabetes.
And you do an event. We'll talk about the event once a year, right, for families with diabetes. But before we talk about the event, let's get some advice. I mean, we've been to Disney many times. I would call myself a crazy planner. So I take care of stuff. I'm good to go. I wasn't all that concerned about diabetes, but that's me. So if for people who are concerned and really worry, where do you start them? Because as you said, Disney in and of itself is a huge, huge vacation to plan.
Really, I start mostly with explaining, for those who have never been to Disney, I explain what seems as basic knowledge to you and me who have been there 100 times, explaining that they can take food into the parks. They can take a stroller into the parks. They can take their supplies into the parks. And you'd be amazed at just hearing those 3 things make them feel 100 times better. Just the simple fact that you can take in low blood sugar snacks, you can take in your water, things like that just immediately helps parents feel a little bit better. Because that's their biggest fear is, what if I get stuck in a line with a low blood sugar? What do I do? They need to know that they have access to their supplies at all times.
And they do. I mean, we've had that situation happen. We've had highs, we've had lows. We've had to sit down in line for Peter Pan when my son was 4 and treat a low. And we always had our stuff with us. And I love with Disney, you don't have to stash things in lockers like you do if you go to Universal.
Universal, you do.
Right, you do have to put things in lockers. Although I have to tell you, I am always the fashionable one with the small fanny pack. I look so cool. But a fanny pack they'll let you on the rides. Even at Universal. So I love the fanny pack, in my opinion, is the way to go. I don't care how silly you look. I rock it. My kids are mortified. I am embarrassment level expert. But it's much easier. I don't have cargo pants, so I don't have all those pockets. But I like the fanny pack. All right, so you can bring your low supplies in. You can have a stroller for little kids. You can rent one, or you can get one for free at Disney. What about, I always warn people about the amount of walking. Because, man, even though we've been several times, I always forget how big it is.
Yes. You walk 7 to 10 miles a day.
Wow.
Yep. And that's one reason why I push a stroller, especially for anybody ages 10 and under. They just don't realize the magnitude of what walking will do to the blood sugar. And even though I send children that are top athletes, as far as they're involved in a lot of competitive gymnastics or baseball teams, football teams, all of that, amusement parks are a totally different creature. Totally different creature. You're just not prepared, and no 2 children have the same reaction at the parks. They can be high, they can be low, they can be both. It doesn't matter. Robert started out when he was little, he would go low so often that we stopped doing insulin during the day, and we would only do his Lantus at night. That was all he needed. Yeah. Because we would go into a meal, and his blood sugar would be 80, and if we gave him his insulin within 2 hours, his blood sugar would be right back down to 80, and then we're having to treat lows the rest of the time. So we just, this is when he was much younger, we just constantly treated so many lows, we stopped doing his mealtime insulin, and he did great. Now, as he's older, I battle just as many highs as I do lows. All of a sudden, he can spike up to 425 just as fast as he can drop to a 50.
And I guess then the ultimate thing to bring is some flexibility and some patience, because a lot of people out there want the same result every day, and that is not going to happen.
They do. I remember hearing a story one day of someone who changed a child's pump site 4 different times in one day.
Oh.
And they were determined that that's what it was, and it wasn't. It had nothing to do with the pump site. It's all the adrenaline, all of the craziness, the excitement, the heat, the dehydration, anxiety, everything. And I know the one thing that everybody gets most frustrated with is the fact that Disney does not provide carb counts.
Yeah, what is with that? I mean, we're beyond it at the point where we guess pretty well and everything, but I was shocked.
Right, exactly. That's kind of where we are, too.
But I was really surprised. They do so many things so well, but they don't do that.
They don't. I have been told it's due to the ever-changing menu. All the different restaurants, they're changing their menus constantly, that they just can't provide it. I think another reason could be liability. But then when you think of the allergy liability that they take on with saying that certain restaurants don't have cross-contamination, things like that, it's as much of a risk. But I just wonder if it's the liability of truly saying, okay, this is absolutely, this item has 12 carbs in it.
Right. Well, if they're going to do carbs, they probably have to provide all of the nutritional information. That was my thinking, is that for some reason it's just become, it's too much for them. But I'm really still surprised by that, especially when they do allergies so well. We don't have food allergies in my family, but I've heard from so many friends and family who say that's the place where they feel safe.
It is. It is. That is the one thing that I hear over and over again, that is the one place that they do feel safe. So, but one thing I do tell people is, okay, so yes, it is true. Disney does not provide carb counts. However, I have heard that a chef will come out and speak with you about how a meal is prepared, and that does help with any possible hidden ingredients that are in there. For example, over at the Garden Grill, they have an oven-roasted turkey that they do. Well, they put a brown sugar, like honey glaze on it. Mm-hmm. So that one little piece of information is kind of helpful, for some maybe, little spikes that you might see. But to be honest, one thing I do try to explain to people is if you are used to eating out, it's going to be a lot of the same foods that you see eating out. So if you are familiar with going to Olive Garden and getting their pasta dishes, or going to just Applebee's and Ruby Tuesdays, things like that, a lot of the meals you will recognize. The buffets for the character meals do have fresh fruit in rolls and fresh salad, things like that. Once you see the food, it's not as daunting as it sounds. And usually what people will find is a lot of the times the erratic blood sugars that they do start to see is not because they miscalculated the meal by 10 carbs or 15 carbs. Right. It's because of everything else compacting that blood sugar.
Does Disney supply cups of water for free?
They do, yes. At any of the quick service places, you can walk in and request a free cup of water. Mm-hmm.
That's something that we live near Carowinds Amusement Park here in the Charlotte area, and that's something that they do, and we take full advantage of that because that's where we go mostly in the summer. And I couldn't remember if Disney had that, because certainly if your child is high, you don't want to restrict access to water.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit, if you could, about the passes now that Disney gives out. My full disclosure is that we've never used or asked for a disability pass or a guest assistance pass or whatever they're called, so I don't know much about them. Can you share a little bit about what they are and what your advice is about them?
It is called the Disability Assistance Service Accommodation. My advice is not everybody needs it, and that's perfectly fine. It's nice to have, just stored in your back pocket, just to have, just in case. But just because you get it doesn't mean you have to use it. So sometimes it's nice to go ahead and get it and plan for it, but there's nothing saying that you have to use it. During Christmas time, during Thanksgiving, the really, really high peak times, it is nice to have it. The way it works is it works like an additional fast pass. When you go to guest relations at any of the 4 parks, everybody in your group must be with you. And when you're going to the Walt Disney World parks, and if you're staying on site, then you have magic bands. If you're staying off site, then you have the hard tickets. The Disney, the DAS is actually electronically linked to those items. So you're not having to carry anything extra around with you. But you need everybody who you want linked to it with you so that they can get everybody linked appropriately. And Disney wants to cut down on the abuse. Disney wants to see everybody who's involved. Technically, they want only 6 people on there. However, Disney does not want to break up groups and break up families. They know that people really want to be together. So they will go. I've seen groups as large as 14 and 16 placed on the DAS.
And what do you get for it?
What you'll do is you'll get your accommodation added to your Magic Band or your park ticket at Guest Relations. And then, like, let's say if you're going to Walt Disney World, you set up a fast pass ahead of time to ride Space Mountain at 11 o'clock, between 11 and 12. Well, what you would do is as you're walking over to Space Mountain, the Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger ride is right next to it. You would make a pit stop, go to the Fast Pass line, say we have the DAS. They're going to look at the standby time. The standby time, for example, is going to be 45 minutes. They're going to give you a return time for that standby time minus 10 minutes. So they're going to give you a return time for 11:35 if you're standing there at 11 o'clock for 35 minutes from the time that you're requesting it. So then you're going to go and ride Space Mountain, use your Fast Pass for that, come back to Buzz Lightyear at 11:35 or any time after, go through, and you'll be able to go through the Fast Pass line at that time. It works as a secondary Fast Pass.
I'm going to ask you a gentle question. Do you think people with type 1 diabetes need this?
I do. But I think it is very specific per person. There are a lot of children that go that don't need it, and that's perfectly fine. But there are a lot of children that go whose blood sugars are so much all over the place that they feel rotten. And this just helps to expedite their day. It helps them to go through the day a little bit faster when they can use the Fast Pass and the DAS together. There are children that have seizures that are heat-induced, so it just kind of helps to keep them. When you're in the lines at Disney, like especially like Thunder Mountain, in that, you know, all of that wood structure, and you're there in June and July when it's so hot, when you're packed in that line of all those people, it gets really, really hot and stuffy. If you can be in the Fast Pass line, it keeps you on the outside of those people for as long as possible. When you're in the standby line, you're in the heart of all of those people. So it just kind of exasperates the heat that the children might be going through.
Well, because I know you've seen this on Facebook. You know, someone will ask a question and then it's 5 pages of judgment. And I ask you that question because I think it's important that you make the decision as a family. If you think your child needs this and will benefit from it, it's available to you. If your child can stand in lines and you're fine, and, you know, like I said, we've never needed it, so we've never gotten it. I don't know much about it, but I would never judge someone else who feels that they need to use that. And I think it's unfortunate that that happens. Do you have to prove to Disney that you have type 1? What do you do?
No, and to be blatantly honest, type 1 diabetes is not technically approved in Disney's mind to receive accommodations. They do not understand diabetes.
So what do you tell them? You say, I have blood sugar issues?
Yes. Just like with any disease or condition that you are going to Disney with and asking accommodations, Disney does not want to know the diagnosis period. The cast members themselves are not doctors, and they're not therapists, psychologists, or anything. So they don't have a full understanding of all of the hundreds of thousands of different cognitive and medical conditions out there. Okay? So even children with ADD and autism, there's such a broad spectrum of everything that one cast member cannot make the determining factor of whether or not you need an accommodation simply based on a diagnosis. So it definitely does not help, especially when diabetes is concerned, to state diabetes by any means whatsoever. So what you do is you go in and you focus on the conditions and what you are most concerned about. how you are concerned about lows could possibly induce a seizure, how highs could cause organ-damaging ketones, things like that. You want to express another thing, reason why I am an advocate of the DAS pass for children with diabetes, because it keeps you in that outside lane. Since the fast pass line wraps around the standby line, it gives you an easier exit. So if your child is dropping from a low and the resources that you have on you are not enough to bring them up and bring them stable, you can exit that line a lot quicker. Or if your child is having problems with highs and is needing to use the bathroom a lot, they can exit the line a lot quicker to access the bathroom.
Got it. So what do you love about Disney World? What brings you back time and time again?
For us, we feel like it's an escape from our everyday world. It is so interesting how when you walk through those gates, it literally does seem like you are transformed into another world. It just seems as though everything that you have just dealt with for the past 6 months or a year just seemed to completely melt away, and you are in another zone.
That's how I feel. It's like, let me play make-believe for a little while. What do you have a particular ride or character experience or dining experience that you love?
Our favorites are, even though my son is 12 years old, we still do Crystal Palace with every single trip.
That's the Winnie the Pooh. That's Winnie the Pooh, right?
It's Winnie the Pooh. Yeah. It is Winnie the Pooh. He is a diehard for that restaurant, and if we skip it on one trip, darn it if I don't have to take him twice on the next one. It is just, that is part of our routine. Another loved favorite is Thunder Mountain for him, and he also just still to this day loves seeing as many characters as he can. So.
I was really sad. One of the last times we went and I wanted to see the fireworks. I just wanted to sit and watch the fireworks, and my children have no patience for that. That was not going to happen. And we did Thunder Mountain, but we did it during the fireworks. That was really cool.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that was great.
Yep. We've done that too, and my son absolutely loves doing that.
Tell me about Diabetic Mousketeers. This is an event that's happening in May. What's that all about?
Diabetic Mousketeers is a trip I organized 5 years ago, specifically for families with diabetes, and it could be type 1, type 2, type 1.5. It doesn't matter. It is designed as an opportunity for families with diabetes to go and meet at the parks. It's very relaxed, very laid back. It's just a chance to play, basically. What it gives is it gives families the opportunity to know that there are other families just like them in the parks at the same time going through the same thing they are. So a lot of the families we end up meeting up most of the time throughout every trip. Every now and then we do have one or two families that get caught up in doing their own thing, and I think that is absolutely wonderful. I want families to know that we're there to support them and be there and hang out with them, but I also want families to feel the freedom to be able to do what they want to do. I organize several different events so that the families do have times to meet, which are going to be character greets, doing character meals together, dining experiences together. I think this year we're going to go to the beach at the Polynesian together and watch the movie out on the beach, the movie Under the Stars, different things like that, just to kind of bring that unity and that time for the kids to be together. We usually spend a lot of time at Animal Kingdom doing the Patagonia Forest and the conservation station and the safari train or the safari ride. Just good times for the children to just relax and be together. And some of my favorite things is watching the children all check their blood sugars together. One of their favorite pastimes. Just knowing that they're not the only one.
Do the characters ever react to that? Have you ever had somebody at Disney react?
I personally never have. We've never had anybody say anything negative or anything. I've heard stories of it happening. Just somebody might say ew or something like that, but we've never run into it.
I was actually thinking the opposite. Like one of the characters would say, wow, like give the kids an attaboy. I wasn't even thinking about the negative, but thankfully we haven't run into that either.
No, no, never have.
Just
usually
another
because
day.
We've always kind of ducked over to the side. And, it's usually because the lows come after attractions, right after being, like, for 1 year, we're going to ride the safari together, but we needed to kill a little bit of time to wait for our return time for the DAS. And so we went through the Patagonia forest together, did lots of walking and everything. Then we finally went on the safari ride together, and it was about 11:30, and all the kids walked off, and every single child except one was under 90. So we all went to lunch together. So,
that's funny.
You just kind of hear all these, I'm low, as you're walking off in camp, coming down. All the children were dropping like flies. So
I'll link up the information for the Diabetic Mousketeers event that's coming up. Before I let you go, I mean, any advice for someone who's going to Disney World with their child with type 1 this holiday? They haven't used you to plan. They think they're set. Any last minute advice?
First of all, they are more than welcome to contact me directly for any last-minute advice. Just because they haven't used me to plan does not mean that I am not willing to talk to anyone and answer any of their questions and just help them. Biggest piece of advice is definitely take it slow. Take it slow, enjoy it. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. Take in your low blood sugar snacks. Take in the snacks that you know work for your child. If you know that Skittles are the dead ringer to bring them up fast, bring that. Don't bring chocolates. Don't bring peanut butter crackers. The chocolate will melt. The crackers will crush. And juice boxes will pop, and so will Capri Sun pouches. That comes from experience. So definitely take a backpack and just pack it with everything that you feel that your child will need. Your bag will be searched at the time of entering each park, but they're not looking for food. They're not going to worry about that at all. They're looking for other items. So just bring in everything that you need to take care of your child. We usually walk in with about 3 bottles of water and 2 bottles of Powerade. And by the end of the day, it's all gone. Yeah.
I think that's great advice. And I would just pop in and add, it is going to take you longer to get there and longer to walk around than you think. And I'm one of those people who I plan where we're going to be at 9, at 11, at 2, we're doing this, we're doing that, and we never get to everything. And that's fine. Just stop, sit down, slow down, do what you can. You're not going to do it all. Don't even try.
You're not. I know people who've been over 100 times, and they still don't.
Wow.
They still don't do it all. And Disney's not going anywhere. I understand that for so many people, this is either a once-in-a-lifetime trip or this is going to be the trip for the next 10 years. And that's perfectly fine. But the bottom line is it's not going anywhere. So whether you're not going back for 6 months or not going back for 20 years, it will still be there. So it's not worth trying to pack it all in. It's not physically possible.
And Mickey bars do have carb counts on them because they're packaged. The Mickey ice cream bars.
Yes, a lot of the prepackaged items do have the carb counts, or you're going to recognize it. Like, for example, and the dining plan for the kids menu comes with a little bitty applesauce on it. Well, that's just like the little Mott's applesauce that you would have at home. So if you're familiar with that item, there you go.
What is that, like 12 carbs? That's like a lunchbox thing.
Yeah, it's just like the little lunchbox size thing. So, and then they've got prepackaged little things of grapes. You can do that. One thing that families might want to know is, especially just for any reason whatsoever, when you have a children's menu, you're given at a quick service place, let's say you go to Cosmic Rays, where you're going to get a hamburger, fries, you're going to get your main dish, you're going to get your side item, and then you're going to get a drink and a dessert. We got really tired of the desserts, and my son is just really picky. He doesn't like them. I always traded my dessert in for an extra bottle of water or an extra bag of grapes.
Oh, that is a good idea.
And they never had a problem with it. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't mention anything when I was at the cash register, because when you walk up, you talk to the first person and give them your money or your dining plan information when you're placing your order, and then you walk the next 10 feet and go up to the counter. I would always mention to the person at the actual counter. It was much easier then for them just to swap out whatever I didn't want. Excellent. Rather than trying to make the nice lady at the cash register try to make exceptions or substitutions. That just doesn't work. But, yeah, I just asked them to swap it out, and we would always have an extra bottle of water at that point.
Well, Robyn Adams, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I will definitely link up your information about the upcoming weekend in May for kids with diabetes and their families at Disney, and your contact information as well, so that people who have, hey, holiday season is here, Disney's packed, they can get in touch with you and get some last minute advice about Disney and diabetes. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
I'm going to link up all the information about the Memorial Day weekend, the Diabetic Mousketeers weekend that Robyn plans. And she's got a bunch of good information on her website, not just about that, but about tips for people with diabetes at Disney. And she can book a vacation for you. She's not just about that one weekend. And she is, as you would imagine, an authorized Disney vacation planner. I want to take another second here and just talk about that disability pass that Robyn mentioned. And it's always a good idea to check up on that. It does change here and there. So I will link up Disney's own explanation about that so you can make sure you understand it before going in. And I also want to follow up on my comments about why we didn't use it with Benny. We never have. And as Robyn said, use it if you need it, no doubt. And the reason that we never used it, well, first of all, was my planning, which again, I will get to in just a moment, tell you a little bit more about how I do it. We just never needed it. But also because, and this was interesting, I didn't realize this until years later. When Benny was about 4, I think was the first time we took him. And he'd been living with type 1 for 2 years already at that point. And the disability pass was presented to me by a very well-meaning other parent, I'm sure, as like a golden ticket, like a prize. It's bad enough that he has diabetes. At least this is one good thing that can come out of it, is kind of how they said it. And it was presented as a reward. And to me, that made no sense at all. We had been focused on saying we're going to raise him with, the knowledge that this was a really challenging condition, but that it wouldn't stop him from doing anything. And, I know that we've gone back and forth about that, but I'm trying to put you in my mindset of where I was at the time, because sure, we still say you can do anything, but now we know it'll slow you down. It'll stop you. This is a good thing, having this pass if you need it. But at the time, we were not looking at it that way. And we thought, why do we want to teach him that he can cut the line just because he has type 1 diabetes? And now looking back, that isn't at all what that pass is about. It's not about cutting the line as a reward for, having to use an insulin pump. It's about, as Robyn said, if your child goes high in the heat, goes low in the heat, God forbid, has seizures, has real problems, things like that. If you know that there are going to be circumstances where this will really help you, then please, please, please go get it. I think sometimes it's more of a hassle in some ways. You have to actually go and get it and do all this stuff. So it's not an easy thing where you just swing by and skip the line. Also, if you're doing this as a reward and that's your personal philosophy, right? Like, hey, diabetes stinks. This is a good thing I can get out of it. I'm not sure that I can judge you either. I'm not sure that I don't have the same mindset that I used to. We all do this differently, and whatever it takes to get you through the day. The only thing is, obviously, we never want anybody to abuse the disability pass. That's one of the reasons why they changed it. It actually used to be a lot easier. I want to say it was maybe 10 years ago that Disney made a lot of changes to the disability pass because people were really abusing it. Not people with type 1 diabetes, people who didn't need it at all. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so how do I get no lines? How do I do this? Well, my secret weapon is a website called touringplans.com. This is an amazing resource. It's the unofficial guide to Disney World. They used to have a book. The first time we went, I used a book, right? Remember that? You'd read the book and mark the pages. But now it's a website and you can make a plan. You can make a physical plan with them. Like, these are all the rides I want to do. They will pop it into their little computer and it will spit out, here's where to start, here's where to go, here's what to get a fast pass for, all this amazing stuff. And the other thing I do with my kids is I say, give me one thing we're going to do today. What's your one choice for today? What's your one thing you want to do in this park? And then I build things around that so that we're not going to do everything we want to do, as that's impossible. But we know we're going to hit the one thing they really wanted to. And I plan really far out in advance. I have a friend who is going to Disney in, I want to say September or October. And God, she's giving me hives because she's going to wing it. And I'm looking at the calendar going, is it 180 days? Do you have your advanced dining reservations? Are you staying on property? So does that mean you can get your fast passes earlier? You need to schedule your rides, pick your top 3. And she would look at me like I had 3 heads if I suggested that. And, a lot of people just wing it and have a great time. But I need to know, if we're going to go on a flight of passage, then I'm getting up at 5 or 6 in the morning the day that my fast pass opens, 30 or 60 days before we're there, so I can book that ride. So I'm not waiting in line for 3 hours when the day comes. Now, I'm sure a lot has changed at Disney because of COVID. So definitely talk to Robyn or check out touring plans. I think it's something like $6 or $7 to get onto touring plans and get their information. And, if you're spending thousands of dollars, another $6 or $7 is not going to make a big difference in your budget, but it will make your money go so much further. They don't pay me. I'm not an affiliate of them. But interesting fact, Len Testa, who runs that whole thing, he's been on the show before. He's been on this show because he had been working in the type 2 diabetes sphere with a medication algorithm to help people figure out, I'm not sure this ever made it to market, but it was called Glucose Path. And it was all about looking at the varieties of medication people are taking, looking at their health insurance and things like that, and trying to figure out what made sense for them to take in terms of what was covered. I don't remember all the fine details about it, but he is just an information guy who loves Disney. So that's how it all came together. It's a whole bunch of algorithms. And if he's applying it to other things now, including diabetes, I thought that was really interesting. Okay, we're not done with Disney. Next week, I will be releasing an episode. Fingers crossed this goes well, because I've been scheduled to talk to him a couple of times and it hasn't worked out, but I think we're good. The gentleman, Don Muchow, who ran from Disneyland to Disney World, he will be on the show next week, and I'm going to ask him a lot of questions, including why. Why did he do this? He ran by foot from California to Florida. He lives with type 1 diabetes. Obviously, this was a big awareness campaign, but holy cow. All right, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. I will see you back here next week for more Disney. And until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.